Proceedings are resumed. Please be seated. Honourable Premier, continuing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that indulgence, and apologize for not being able to locate my notes. I'm grateful to Councillor Connolly for having assisted. Mr. Speaker, in February 2015, an application was made to the Caymanian Status and Permanent Residency Board for the right to be Caymanian for Mr. David Morit. However, in October that year, the board deferred Mr. Morit's application and made a recommendation to Cabinet for the grant of the right to be Caymanian. In November 2017, Cabinet approved the recommendation for Mr. Morit to be granted the right to be Caymanian and requested that the decision be sent to the Legislative Assembly for ratification. Mr. Speaker, I will now outline the reasons why the Caymanian Status and Permanent Residency Board and Cabinet were convinced that Mr. Morit deserves the highest status that we grant non-nationals, that is, the right to be Caymanian. David Morit is a 71-year-old British national who has spent most of his time in the Cayman Islands since 1988. He considers the islands to be his home and pays homage for bringing his dreams and aspirations to fruition. Mr. Morit has fully integrated into the community and is highly respected and regarded for his significant local investments and ongoing contributions of around $15,000 to $20,000 each year for various local charities and causes. Since arriving in the Cayman Islands in 1988, he has made substantial investments in the Eastern District of Grand Cayman. In 1988, he purchased what was then Tortuga Club and later developed Morit's Tortuga Club, followed by Morit's Grand, and in 2014, a 20-unit luxury section of the property called the Londoner. The resort has received distinguished awards and accolades, including the prestigious Gold Crown Resort and the Silver Crown Resort property designation by RCI, the worldwide leader in vacation exchange. The former with respect to Morit's Grand Resort and the latter with respect to Morit's Tortuga Club. His operations were also awarded the best resort in the Caribbean and Latin America. These awards not only enhance the resort's own reputation, but Cayman's tourism product as well. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Morit has contributed to the livelihood of Caymanians through employment opportunities, as over 80% of the resort's staff are Caymanian, and notably provided the opportunity that has allowed for a young Caymanian business owner to establish his own business at the Morit's Resort. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Morit spends the majority of his time in the Cayman Islands and continues to have aspirations of additional growth and expansion for the resort. He has remained robust about the islands and demonstrated outstanding contributions in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan, which significantly assisted the Caymanian people and the revitalization of the economy during this difficult time. Notably, he provided free water to residents throughout East End by filling tankers with water from the resort and provided food and supplies to the 2 East End shelters during that very difficult period in the aftermath of the hurricane. Despite this, Mr. Speaker, and in spite of his many contributions and the active role in investing and developing in the Cayman Islands for over 25 years, he has never acquired status and has remained here as a visitor, as he had previously not been advised on the matter. As a result, he was not in a position to move forward in acquiring Caymanian status through traditional means because he had never had the requisite period of residence as the law requires in order to apply. his time here has been all these years as a visitor. Mr. Speaker, his long-standing interest in the Cayman Islands, matched with his long-term business strategies, including expansions and continued development of the property, demonstrate his steadfast commitment and positive contribution to the tourism sector and economic sustainability of these islands. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is for those reasons that the Caymanian Status and Permanent Residence Board recommended to Cabinet that his application for the right to be Caymanian by way of Cabinet grant should be considered. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet has supported the recommendation of the Board as we recognize his Mr. Morit's significant contributions to the tourism industry, the advancement of the Eastern District, and additional plans for further development. There is no doubt that Mr. Morit's tourism product has brought positive international exposure to the Cayman Islands, and that he is therefore a person deserving of consideration of being granted the right to be Caymanian in accordance with the provisions of the immigration law. Mr. Speaker, the law, the relevant section, requires that the application first be made to the Board, and that the Board, if it so considers, should recommend to the Cabinet the award of the grant of the right to be Caymanian. Following the grant by Cabinet, the law further requires that the order be brought to this Honorable House, and that on motion, the House by resolution affirm the decision of the Cabinet. And so, Mr. Speaker, that is the process that we are going through now. And Mr. Speaker, I commend the motion to all members of this honorable House. I note, Mr. Speaker, that during the last meeting of the House, when 3 other worthy individuals were conferred, who had been conferred the right to be Caymanian, had their matters brought before the House, and the House voted unanimously in support, that the member from East End urged that we deal with this matter as a matter of urgency, and we so did, Mr. Speaker, and we are grateful to him for his support.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the country knows my position on Cayman status and what I believe moving forward needs to happen, that it should only be awarded to people by descent and marriage. I think the country knows that quite well. But we are where we are. Time moves on. And right now, the situation is that it can be granted by Cabinet to worthy individuals. Mr. Speaker, my relationship with Mr. Morit has been on and off. Sometimes we have a beer, sometimes we don't break bread. But it is undeniable that this man has contributed significantly to this country. And in particular, he has been invaluable to the employment situation in East End. So much so that right now, a second-generation hotelier, third-generation hotelier, just grandson of Frank Connolly is the general manager at Tortuga Club. I believe Tortuga Club has, over the years, had more Caymanians as general managers than any hotel in this country. That is from, let us not forget, the Bergstroms, from their time as well. And they had more ambassadors, Miss Cleo, and then Uncle Frank now is, Frank Connolly now is ambassador for, and he's 91. And his grandson is the general manager. Mr. Speaker, I was unaware that Mr. Morit wanted to be a Caymanian until I understood that maybe because of the challenges he and I had, I might have been opposing it. No such thing, I didn't know. Because if there are others who are worthy, he is definitely worthy of being called Caymanian. I can have differences with people, but I can be fair. Good. Unfortunately, somehow, this got out to him, and I believe it might have been because it was put on the immigration list. So when he last came in December, he found out at the airport that he had been granted Cayman status by cabinet, but it had to be ratified here, which we are doing now. And I have received 1 million calls from him, and I just can't get him off the phone. That's how excited he is about becoming Caymanian. He has promised me since December 1 million times to expand the property. And he's going to be around for the next 90 years. And we are going to do great things in East End still. So I look forward to the expansion of that facility. He has developed the largest timeshare in this country. The largest timeshare institution with 98% occupancy around the year round. He has contributed, like the Premier said, significantly to the social well-being of that district. Food for socials, for the older persons month, and every Tuesday, and what have you. He has hired people into his institution that would otherwise not be worthy of being hired. He has had his challenges. I have been one of those challenges that Mr. Morit has had in this country. Because when he brought his son-in-law, I told him that his son-in-law was a cowboy and he was not worthy of being at Tortuga Club. So much so that I even visited cabinet with the matter, because he was issued one of those permit visitors to work permit. I visited the governor on it, trying to reverse it. Nothing happened. Mr. Speaker, I guess a year later, I was in a social setting and I saw a strange number on my phone. And when I answered it, it was Mr. Morit calling from somewhere in Europe. And he said, Arden, I had to call you. No, he said, Mr. McLean, I had to call you. I said, why? What did I do now? He said, you were right. My son-in-law was a cowboy and he was going to destroy my relationship in East End. And I fired him today. I thanked him for that, and the club then moved on to another expat stroke Caymanian, and then it has now moved on to Frank Connolly's grandson. Mr. Speaker, the hotel, timeshare, condo, whatever we want to call it, is one of the most successful institutions in this country. He has properties next door, vacant property, that he hopes to expand on, which is the promise he made to me. I hope that that becomes a reality. I've always promoted one more hotel in East End, but I wanted a 5-star hotel. I don't know what his plans are, but certainly we will see. Mr. Speaker, the Premier is right. I brought it to his attention during October, I think, when we were here with the other three. But I also brought to his attention that one of those that was conferred in October, that status was conferred upon by Cabinet in October, was one of our ghost, quote-unquote, Caymanians. And I urge the Premier to just let's blanket that and give these people their status. Well, he said changes are coming for the immigration law, you mean? Because you can't do 4. You can only do 4. You can't do 4 no more now? Okay, okay. Because that is important as it is to recognize people like Mr. Morit. It is also important to recognize our ghosts. You know, I'm not going to call them that. Because that leg call them that, you know. And I don't want nothing to do with him. I want to call them Caymanians who have not been recognized, who have lived here all their lives, grew up with us, grew up with our children, and they have fallen through the cracks. And we need to pull them out of that crack to make them feel like they are a part of this country, like the rest are. They buck out their toenails here. They went to school here. And those are the ones we need to also look at. And the Premier is saying there now in response to me that the next meeting we will have something to correct that and I hope it's put in, and then even with the sunset clause for a few years so that they can all regularize them, make application to regularize themselves without it being so difficult. All they need to do is prove they're here for all those years. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Cabinet for acting on Mr. Morit's thing, albeit that it was laying somewhere there in limbo for a while. But be that as it may, I think it's a good day for David Morit to know that he's Caymanian now. And there are others who I'm not going to rub shoulders with, and I don't think I probably will never rub shoulders with Mr. Morit, but he's deserving of it. And I thank Cabinet for doing that. Cabinet, I noted, not the Premier. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, on behalf of the people of East End and Mr. Morit and his family, I thank the Premier and the Cabinet for conferring such a privilege, such an honor upon a man who has contributed to this country greatly. Of course, he made his money too, but that's what business is about, eh? But it lifted our country in the tourism sector worldwide. It is my understanding that he's now building a hotel in Canada or someplace. So he is even spreading Cayman that much further. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak, Honorable Premier? You wish to?
Mr. Speaker, just to thank all members.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I need to move a little faster. I apologize. I only want to add my level of support in respect to Mr. Moore, in respect to him being granted status. I am not as familiar with him as the elected member from East End, but as an elected member of this House, once this kind of motion comes to this House, I think it's a responsibility of mine to do a little background checks in respect to the individual. Even though I knew about him beforehand, I think most Caymanians do know about him. But I did my due diligence in asking around to persons who have been affected by him in the different ways, and some of those ways have already been suggested here tonight in respect to working opportunity. And when I felt, I just want to express when I knew I was confident in being able to say that I would support this, is when a 47-year-old woman from East End said, Kenneth, without that hotel and without him, I wouldn't be able to feed my family. And that's what the Cayman Status Grant should really be about, is protecting and looking out for each other in the core essence of it. That being said, I want to, and this is by no means to undermine the granting of this status to anybody, but I always remind those who are being granted the right of status, though he's expressed it already by so much donations, but you are now a part of the family, and all the good things you've done for many, many years, you did with your own goodwill. Now that you're a part of the family, you're almost obligated to do so, in my mind, because we're all in this boat together. So congratulations to him and his family, and I am happy to say that he's now a part of my family. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, just to thank all members of the House, those who have spoken and those who haven't, for their support expressed or tacit, and to say that I join in welcoming Mr. Moorick to the Caymanian family. I know him well enough to know he will be incredibly proud to call himself Caymanian.
I hope they take that phone from him.
Question is, be it therefore resolved that the immigration grant of the right to be Caymanian Order 2017 number 4 be affirmed by the Legislative Assembly pursuant to the provisions of Section 21E of the Immigration Law 2015 revision. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against?
No.
The ayes have it. Government motion number 9 is duly passed. Premier, the adjournment.
Mr. Chair, having consulted with the leader of the opposition, I just want to indicate to members, and that's all it is, an indication, as to future meetings during this year. I can't give but indications at this early stage because government works, we try as best we can to get work ready to bring here. And of course, there are constitutional considerations with respect to notice for bills and so forth, which is the greatest challenge of all. But the current proposal is that we would be back here towards the end of May. The last week in May is my current thinking. Then again, for many years, members and staff have worried about vacation time, particularly when children are out of school. So we are proposing to take the months of July and August off as far as the Legislative Assembly is concerned, so members can make their plans. And we would be back here again in the first week of September, and then back again, I would expect the first week in November. And that would be the schedule, roughly, of meetings for the rest of the year. And so with that, Mr. Speaker, it is but for me to thank members for agreeing to work late on all 3 evenings to complete the business of the House, and for me now to move the adjournment of this Honorable House sine die.
Honorable members, bear in mind that June 15th, we host the Regional Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference here. Question is that this House...
In accordance with Standing Order 10.5, I would like to preserve the rest of the business on the order paper that was entered upon and approved by the Business Committee, that it be preserved for the next meeting. I would like to move in accordance with Standing Order 10.5 that the business that was approved by the Business Committee, placed on order paper, that was not dispensed with at this meeting, be carried forward to the next meeting.
Question is that the remainder of business on the order paper, today's order paper,
Mr. Speaker, I would like to second the motion as moved by the Leader of the Opposition.
it's not a written motion, but we all understand what it is. This is in the record.
That's fine.
And so the question is that the remaining business on today's order paper, private members' motions, be carried over to the next meeting. All in favor? Aye. Those against? No. Ayes have it. Question is that this Honorable House do now adjourn, sine die. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
I know.